All right, we are in. Matt, the countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We started episode 4 with an illustrious guest, our buddy John Meskauskas, shaper, main boss at Flying Fish Board Co. Significant presence, certainly in the southeast of the U.S., but all over the U.S., in Canada, handful floating around internationally. John, your shapes are, I would say, pretty well known now. It helps having Erie Tenorio kind of covering the globe with his board.
Yeah.
Having some great results last year, by the way. Welcome, first of all. I just saw you. It's good to see you again.
Yeah,
so
you
soon
too.
thereafter.
Yeah, you too, for sure. Yeah, it's crazy whenever you just pop up in Florida. It's random.
That was definitely very random. That one. That was cool. Maybe we just talk about that real quick. This is obviously a USA SUP podcast, or maybe it's not obvious. It is a USA SUP podcast. Yeah. And one of the things we're trying to do is highlight and bring cohesion. And this is not just this podcast, but what USA SUP is trying to do, highlight and bring cohesion to the various things going on around the country, maybe get uniformity where it makes sense, where that helps people, but also highlight the differences in different areas, just because we have this amazing literal and figurative ecosystem that we paddle in around the country. I would say the giant and beating heart of the sport right now in the United States is in Florida. Probably more competitive paddlers there than SoCal at this point, although it's close.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that for sure. Especially in our basic local community, to be honest with you. I mean, if you really want to narrow it down even further than just Florida, the Southeast Coast and the Jupiter Stuart area, as you witnessed this weekend, and I'll let you maybe talk about it more than me, but we had our local race league. And it literally is just a Tuesday night race league that we hosted on a Saturday this particular weekend. And we can get into details of that if you want. But I believe Jeremy Vane, JV, said there was around 150 paddlers. I don't know what you thought. I thought it was close to 150 paddlers. And not just like 150 random paddlers. Like, I mean, obviously it's all levels, and that's what we promote. Is getting new people into the race scene and into racing in general. But I mean, we had Tommy Boudet there, Erie Tenorio was there, obviously Steve Miller and Jake Portwood and just like Kim Barnes, Stephanie Schidler, Seychelle. I mean, I think I finished like maybe 20th place. I don't even know. And I consider myself a decent paddler, but it was quite the turnout and a competitive race like that.
It's worth noting, just real quick as an aside, for folks who aren't familiar with you, John, that I would put like legitimate money that you are the fastest board brand owner on the water.
Ooh, I think might beg to differ.
But... Sorry.
Yeah, so I mean,
this is not a shot at you, John.
No,
outside of Dan.
Yeah, outside. I first was like, oh no. But I think. I appreciate it, Adam. I try my best, and my goal is the Masters division, because I'm 50 now. So it's like, hey, man, I want to roll into ICFs and do as well as I can in the Masters. I got second last year behind John Badson. So I'm like, all right, this year I'm going to keep pushing. I'm dealing with a back injury right now, but I'll come back. So
I should have prefaced that with the Masters, because Danny is a very young board owner, board brand owner.
Yeah, and Danny's a legend. So
he is a legend.
Yeah.
I think outside of Danny, you may have that crown though. Fastest board owner.
I'll take it. Yeah.
For maybe those who I've never been to one, but I try to pay attention, and I'm just full of FOMO every time I see race recaps and stuff. But can you give people like a quick rundown of like what your local Tuesday night race league is like?
Yeah, I mean, we run it year round, which is beautiful. Now during this daylight savings period, we call it Tuesday night training, because we started at 5 p.m. So a lot of people can't quite get there by 5. So it's more like just a training paddle, but we're still drawing, 30 to 40 people on the training paddle in the winter. And then soon as the time changes in a few weeks, Blue Line will kick off there. Oh, by the way, it is put on by Blue Line Surf and Paddle in Jupiter. They're a huge staple in our area for stand-up paddleboarding, and have been for years. They were probably I think they were the first shop opened in the area back in 2009 or 10. They can correct me on that. But they host it. and it's across the street from their shop at a restaurant called Guanabana. So the atmosphere is great. We include it's a $10 entry fee, not during the training. Training's free, obviously, but like on normal Tuesday night, you
Nice.
pay $10, or you can pay for the whole season. I think it's $90 for 10 weeks, something like that. So you save $1, but you get free beer tickets afterwards for Guanabanas. So
It's a
it's
wash.
really, it's a wash, yeah, and it's a social thing. To be honest with you, it's a very competitive training and racing, but then afterwards, it's like everybody just gets together and hangs out in the parking lot or goes to Guanabanas and hangs out, and it's just community just keeps growing and growing, and I think it's I'd love to see it in other areas for sure. If we could
Yeah,
have,
and Guanabanas, by the way, is not just like a four-walled room. It's like a tiki style thing that you get
yeah,
them all over Florida, but it's unique to Florida. It's palm trees everywhere, and you're on the water, and
yeah,
it's Florida, so it's
yeah.
warm and
Yeah, I
it's a
mean
good vibe.
the dock is lined with Adirondack chairs, so it's like stadium seating for the start of the race, and so yeah,
Oh, heck
yeah.
yeah.
Matt, you got to come down. You're not far away, so
I know. I think it's like an 8-hour drive. I just got to pick a day and
yeah,
go.
yeah, you should do it for sure. But yeah, it
I had, oh man, it looked so competitive for this last one where there was 150 people. Were like, I think Adam, you reached out and said like, this is maybe one of the most hotly contested races on the East Coast.
yeah,
Yeah, it was a $10 kind of schmo race that could have been classified as the North American East Coast Championships.
yeah. I think you're pretty much right on that. I think Tim Oliver from Canada, if he was here, that would have been
There's
maybe.
a few
There's
missing.
a few missing, but not many. I mean, so and that's weekly for us. I mean, and I'm fortunate enough to have those guys on our team, right? I mean, and we can maybe get into that later, and and how big of a role those guys play for us. But yeah, Tuesday Night Race League is the nucleus of this area. Period. Like
Yep.
a lot of people give me credit for it or us credit. I try to take the credit off of me. Flying Fish in general, they try to give us credit. They give Blue Line and JV a ton of credit. It's really everybody because it's a combination of us and JV, and just the running clubs in town have started coming, and the cycling clubs. And it's like, so everybody's starting to
Oh,
like just feel this, and it's really cool. I mean, it's hard to explain, but we're getting athletes from other sports, and they're just falling in love with the racing. So it's really cool to see.
that's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's really cool to see.
Yeah, look, Florida's. I mean, I went paddling yesterday morning in the dark and cold, and the Angry Sea Lions are back now, and it's like you have to avoid. Uh, Florida is sort of the opposite. I mean, you could get trailed by a hammerhead for miles, but
Yeah, yeah, that has happened. Yeah,
but no, but the warm water,
yeah,
and then the location and the organization,
yeah.
and the board shops, obviously not just Flying Fish, but like you said, Blue Line. Travis Kent has his shop
Oh man,
up closer to
unfortunately,
Stuart.
they
Yeah.
just closed. They
Oh,
just
they closed. Are they online only, or they closed
yeah,
altogether?
no, online only. So they
Okay. Yeah.
closed the brick and mortar, which is really it hurt me a little bit to see that because I love Travis and Lisa, and I had my own board shop before I started building boards. I had a paddle
Yep.
shop, and I had to close mine, and it's a tough business to be in. Blue Line is so
Mm.
fortunate. The location's amazing, and they've built such a following on just their apparel alone. I mean, I don't think. I mean, Adam, you can attest for this. I don't think you can go anywhere in Jupiter without running into somebody wearing a Blue Line hat, shirt, sweatshirt, something. Like,
Including podcasts emanating from the area,
yeah,
apparently.
yeah, I got my hat on. Yeah, there you go. I mean,
Yeah. No, they make cool gear.
yeah,
No, I mean, they have good stuff.
yeah,
What's the complaint about?
yeah,
Nothing.
yeah.
Well, let's use that scene as a way to kind of back in. Okay, so first of all, if it's not apparent to folks, you're joining from the fish tank.
Yeah, I'm in the
Your
tank.
shaping shop.
Yeah, I'm in the tank. We
Yeah.
call it the fish tank, and I think I coined that a while back when I was here at like 10 o'clock at night building a board, and I was like, man, I'm putting in some overtime here, and I'm like, I gotta what is this? I'm like, and I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna call this the fish tank. Like this is where we breed. This is where the magic happens. This is where we. So yeah, we're fortunate.
I love
Yeah,
it.
we've got a 3,500 square foot facility here, our own CNC machine, which we can get into that, which plays a huge role for us having the ability to cut our own boards on the spot whenever we want to make a tweak, things like that. But yeah, I am in the tank. I'm officially in the tank.
Yeah. So that's a perfect segue, because between your ability to sort of do rapid prototyping, essentially,
Hmm.
and there's nothing too rapid about producing a board,
Yeah.
but and all the paddlers you have,
Hmm.
um, and I mean like all of them. So and maybe I'll lead the witness here a little bit. My take, so we first met like 5 or 6 years
Yeah,
ago
it
now.
was
Yeah,
about
five
five.
years ago.
Yeah,
Yep,
because I
and you
was
were in the
building them
other
in
facility
six
right
years
there.
ago. As I was still building them in my garage. So
Yeah. Okay, so 5 years
yeah,
ago,
you
and
visited me
the
in the
story is
first
just that.
factory. Yeah, the first factory.
Yeah, that's right. So I reached out and I was like, we didn't know each other, and I was like, I was getting really into racing. I was like, I've never seen a board built before, and I knew that you were building them down there, and so I just cold called you and was like, can you show me around? And you did, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
I'm a devotee of my various flying fish, but one thing that's happened, originally it was a small group of you guys,
Hmm.
obviously, and super talented paddlers like Miller,
Hmm.
who is not exactly an analog for the rest of us in terms of athletic ability and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy's
Yeah.
a ninja.
Kim
Um,
Barnes. I mean,
Kim Barnes,
geez.
yeah. So you guys, you were building boards initially that way, but now you've got this like massive community, and I
Mhm.
know whether you want to hear it or not, you're getting feedback all
Yeah.
the time,
Yeah.
like literally
Yeah.
several times
Yeah.
a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of people are in your ear, but you have this ability to gather feedback from like world class paddlers, as well as like schmoes like me, and you know um and make tweaks and changes. And I think one of the hallmarks of flying fish is that you still really have the two main, you have a free bird, which is your downwind
Hmm.
ocean board, but your two main lines are essentially the free glide and the freedom. And maybe you can tell us about those boards, but I also kind of want to get an understanding of how you guys develop and iteratively and continuously improve on the product, because I think that's kind of unique.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's a lot to swallow at one time, but I can handle this. Um,
It's what I do
Yeah,
best.
well, I'm first going to talk about real quick, like having like an Erie and a Steve Miller and a Kim Barnes and Stephanie Schidler, and the list goes on. Jake Portwood and Tim Moore, all these guys, all our top paddlers. And then I also have like you and the schmoes, as you like to call it, right? Which we used to, one of our terms early on, I'm getting a little digressing a little bit, but one of our hashtags used to be like average pros and average Joes. Like we used to always promote that, like building boards for the average pros and the average Joes, because the feedback from the average Joes, and that's why I kind of use that segue, the feedback from the average Joes actually is what I built this my original board on, because I was an average Joe. And so this sort of, I guess, will lead into the board design. When I very first designed my very first race board, the reason I got into it is I was a shop owner and I really wasn't happy with the stock race boards that were out there, to be honest with you. Um, I kept thinking, God, there's got to be a better design or a better shape. Everyone was doing these such hard displacement haul boards. You were just starting to see more planing style boards. I think NSP for sure was one of the first ones that started doing more planing style, and then you started seeing more dugouts and things like that. And so I was getting really intrigued if like we can build a better beast. But my very first design, I'd said to myself, like, I'm going to build the most stable race board possible. Like, because I felt like a lot of boards were unstable at the time. Like, we were riding 25s and we thought they were so tippy. And then even some of the pros, if you remember, like maybe, I mean, I don't know how long you've been racing, Adam, but like 2014, maybe 15, you started seeing guys going to like 22s. And, the pros were starting to drop down to 22s. And then you even saw some of them be like, whoa, I'm pushing it a little bit. Let me go back to like a 23. And now, I mean, look at it now, right? Guys are riding 19.5s and 19.75s, and 21 is like the standard board for the pro, like in all conditions, which is amazing because it's board design. Like a lot of us, and I'm not saying I'm like the pioneer of stability, but all the brands have focused on, I believe, trying to make the boards a little more stable. Because it obviously the more stable the board is, the narrower the board a customer can ride, and they're inherently going to be faster for the most part. So that was my whole plan when I designed the Free Glide, which was our very first board. We don't build that model anymore. We build the Free Glide version 2. I mean, being a custom board builder, I guess we could build it if somebody really wanted a classic. But my whole plan, like I said, was to build a stable board, right? Because I really wanted to build it for the average Joe. I really wasn't thinking about pros and all that stuff. Obviously, at this point, I'm in my garage, on my shaper software, like designing, pulling dots and moving lines, and just couldn't wait to cut my first board and test it and all that good stuff. But it was designed basically with stability in mind. I wanted a stable board, and I wanted a true hybrid where you could plane it at high speeds, and then as second you slow down your cadence, the nose sort of settles into the water a bit, and you still get somewhat of a displacement, and you get some free glide, and that's how I came up with the name free glide. And then since then we've kept with the free theme, all the boards, which is kind of a curse, right? Because when I'm talking to somebody, I'm like, yeah, we got the free glide, freedom, free bird, So, but yeah, that's how the original board started. It was all about stability. So that was it. And then when some of the local guys who were faster, like a Steve Miller, got on it and he was testing it against the board he was on, which is a major brand, he was like, wow, this 22 of your design is faster than my 21 and a half of this design. And I'm blown away by the fact that I can stand on it stable, and he was just, and I think that was sort of like the start, and then once Steve was on him, then, Kim Barnes, well, let me check this out. And all the local people just like, well, let me check this out. And then it just sort of snowballed from there. And I don't know how long you want me to go before you start throwing questions at me, because it developed.
No, I mean, you can go forever, but yeah. So let me ask
Yeah.
you a question then, I
Yeah.
guess. So you said like the initial goal with the first board was
Yeah.
stability. And I imagine that still plays a rather large role, especially in the boards you
Yeah.
design for
Sure.
the non-elite
Yep.
paddlers, right? When you go to design a board that has stability in it, maybe let's like define, obviously like there's primary and secondary
Correct.
stability, but what things do you put into a board to accomplish that goal?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's pretty simple. The bottom rail design plays probably the largest factor in stability. Okay, so, but there's other factors, right? Rocker profile, the ratio of volume, nose to tail, obviously the width of the board. But we're trying to talk about like comparing a 23 to a 23 to a 23.
Sure, yeah, all other things
Yeah,
being equal,
and
right? Like if we're
yeah,
yeah.
and then concaves in the bottom. And then I use a term because I came from kind of a boating world. I was a boat captain before I got into all this. And I remember being in like second grade drawing sport fish boats. I used to literally sketch sport fishing boats because, I mean, Stuart, Florida, if anybody knows, it's like the capital of also all the sport fishing boats, like, American Custom Yachts and Garlington, and there's a ton of them. But so as a kid growing up, I'd see these sleek sport fishing boats just running through the water. So I was always like intrigued, I think, by like just the design of boats in general. And I've owned plenty of boats in my life. On wow, this boat runs great, but it's super tippy boat. You get in rough seas and you're like rocking all over the
Mm.
place. Oh, this little skiff goes in really shallow water, but the ride really sucks. It beats the crap out of you. So I use a lot of those boating terms. So anyway, the reason I talk about this is dead rise, I call it. And it's a boating term. And I don't really hear many people talk about it in paddling world, but basically it's the measurement from the stringer, the stringer line on the bottom to the rail, right? So if you have a very V bottom, you have maybe a 15-degree dead rise, or however you want to. We measure it more in inches, like a quarter-inch dead rise, half-inch dead rise, right? That is what I call dead rise. So that plays a
So
huge factor in stability. Is the
was that essentially like how much V there is off the
correct,
tail
and it could be.
for people that are looking at the butt
Yeah,
of their own board?
yes, exactly. And it doesn't have to be a V
Cool.
either, right? Because it could be a rounded bottom, but it's basically the point on the
Sure.
rail, the point on the side rail, the highest point of the side rail to the stringer line. So a lot of the original
Gotcha.
designs were rounded, right? I mean, we had rounded rails and rounded bottoms, and everybody was trying to like maybe look at sailboat design, or they were looking at different things and just trying to like come up with like what's going to be the fastest haul, right? Like this is going to be fast. And we don't really. I mean, this might come back to bite me. Something will be like, "What? You don't design your boards to be fast?" It's like, no, I don't. I do design my boards to be fast, but that's not the primary thing. We try to design boards that have the least amount of limitations. if
Mm.
that's
Can you dive into this a little bit?
uh
This is an interesting
okay. Well, I just feel like, yeah,
idea
I can
here.
design a fast hull, like a fast board, but you may not be able to buoy turn it well. You definitely won't be able to surf it well. It's going to be designed to go straight, and there's things, so many factors play into racing, right? The start, drafting, bump riding, wake riding, or same term, I guess, but um, foot steering. Like we try to think of every aspect of the race and what's going to give you the advantage over somebody who has the exact same ability as you, or roughly the same ability as you, right? So if you have two paddlers with very similar abilities, but I can give them a tool that's lighter, which is, we can get into that because that was one of my other main factors designing a board. I was like, I can definitely build a board lighter than the boards being made overseas for sure. um Weight, and then again, just less limitations, right? Less things that are restricting the board. And that might be a good segue to get into the freedom, because that's sort of how we came up with the freedom. Is like, after riding the free glide for a while, we realized the limitations of it.
I want to hear about the genesis of the freedom.
Yeah, okay, because it really, the freedom is our number one seller by far, and I truly believe that it's one of the best designs or boards on the market. Not however you want to call it, board design, whatever. It's the best board we've ever manufactured for sure. The current Freedom Pro, and I'll get into the Freedom versus Freedom Pro in a minute, but the current Freedom Pro, in my opinion, is the best board we've ever designed. But what started the Freedom was Hood River, Oregon, 2017, I believe, maybe 18. Yeah, I believe it maybe was 18. I'd have to look back, but we all showed up at Hood River with free glides, and that was the only model we had. And wow, we were humbled quickly by how responsive, or over responsive, the rails were to that high speed water and downwinding and things of that nature, right? And so we quickly realized that we had to develop a more of an open water board. I mean, at the time we were considering it more like a downwind board, but it wasn't even like a true downwind like the Freebird. That came along later with Josh Riccio joining the team and things like that. But we had to design a board that was more based around open water. And living in, even in Florida, I started tweaking, and it all started in Hood River. Like, I literally remember sitting on the couch in our house with the laptop, and the whole team was sitting there, and we're huddled around the computer, and I'm moving dots and shaping rails, and they're like, yeah, that's, oh man, that's going to be it, And so we basically came out with the very first Freedom, and it has evolved a ton since. I don't know where you want to kind of go from there, because there's been so many versions of the Freedom. I could go straight to the new Freedom, but if you want to,
Yeah, I just think this is like an interesting
okay,
concept, right? That like it's if you want to, like, to your point earlier, right? It's not that hard to make something go fast in flat
correct,
water, right? The science is
yeah,
there. You look at any like K1 or
yeah,
C1, Olympic kayak, Olympic canoe, right? They're narrow. It's a displacement
yep,
nose, hard pin
yep,
tail. Actually, the K1s have like a
yep,
hard
yep,
cutoff on the
yep,
back end.
yep,
But yeah, right. So like the science is there to make something fast, and it's interesting seeing like the most popular boards on the planet. None of them look like that, even though all the board designers are smart people, and that science is there, right? So I think for people coming in, especially coming from other racing sports, whether it be like cycling or
yeah,
paddling or kayaking, it's an interesting thing to see that. And like, where you guys are, flat water doesn't really exist,
correct,
right?
correct,
Like you're not ever
yeah,
in glassy
yeah,
water. So yeah, maybe go into like some of the elements that you put into the Freedom or Freedom
okay,
Pro, whichever one you feel like diving into
yeah,
there, that maybe differentiate it from or allow it to do the things that it does, I
yeah,
guess.
okay, perfect. That's a great uh, entrance into that. So the the first thing we did on the Freedom was we had to add a little more rocker to it, right? The Free Glide, and I'm not going to give you guys exact numbers, but it was a flatter rocker, okay? Because obviously we all know that the longer water line is going to be, supposedly a little bit faster and this and that, but obviously you also have limitations. The more water line you have, um, the more the board is going to get steered right or left with side chop and boat wakes and all this stuff. And so again, flat water board designed to go straight. So the first thing we had to do is add some more rocker to the board in general. And then we basically started by softening the rails, adding more volume to the nose, things of this nature, just to make it more friendly in rough water. And it seemed like, and this will kind of segue into the Freedom Pro, it seemed like every time our pros, and I say our pros, meaning, Miller and Kim Barnes and Stephanie and those, I can repeat their names over and over, but those guys play a huge role in our board design, right? I always run almost everything by these guys. Tim Warner, I have to mention his name because he's like probably the one that pushes me the most towards like round rails. Like he loves round rails, right? So we always joke around. I call him Timmy Round Rails, But every time we've tweaked the Freedom, we've always softened the rail, like and me coming from that whole, like, guys, I want to build these boards for the average Joes. Like, I want to make sure they still step on the board and go, wow, this thing feels great. This thing feels amazing, So I had to start implementing other tweaks like the dead rises, the widths of the tails, different other ways to gain stability without losing too much, of stability by softening the rails to make the board more free. And that's why we call it the Freedom, because you have the freedom to control the board versus the ocean controlling the board, right? So the higher level of paddle.
Do you find that there's been a transition in maybe how people are experiencing the boards as the rails, like in the differentiation between primary and secondary stability, right? Where, primary stability is like that. Correct me if you're defining this differently too, right? It's like you step on the board, it doesn't move. It feels like you're standing on land. It's stable, right? And I think that that's what a lot of people, especially first coming into the sport, are looking to find. And then as you progress, especially maybe in like a dugout with taller walls, you can get away with rounder rails where it's going to move. You don't have that same, it's not moving, but you're not going to get dumped out of the board or anything. It's hard to fall out of. And do you see that like adjustment happening from newer riders as they're in the sport for a little while and then say, okay, now I am redefining what stable means?
100%. And we're also finding that taking brand new paddlers and putting them on the Freedom Pro, and they just learn like this is just how it feels, and you just, like you just said, like give them the confidence that, hey, this board is not going to roll over on you like a canoe or a kayak, or like you can't flip this board. Like, and we've all seen the videos of, speaking of Danny Ching, we've seen the videos where he puts the board and puts his foot on the side, like you could do that on our board as well. Like the boards are designed with lots of secondary stability. And I think the more advanced rider you are, the less initial stability you actually want, right? Because the board is a little more predictable and I can get into, Miller's going to love listening to this podcast later because he always talks about a board being unstable or tippy and a board being squirrely. So we use the word squirrely a lot. So what we mean by a board being squirrely is it moves unexpectedly on you. And it usually happens from an outside factor like a boat wake or reverb off a seawall or just something where the board might make a quick movement on you, especially on the tail of the board, right? And it throws you off the board. And it's like, man, this board is not tippy at all, but it's squirrely, especially at high speeds, right? Imagine like you've downwinded, I'm sure, to some extent, and you're just 10, 12 miles an hour down the face of a wave, and you bury a little bit of a nose rail, and all of a sudden the board just like takes a hard right, and you go take a hard left, and you're like, holy crap, what just happened? That's the board being squirrely. So the more forgiving the board is and allows you to control the board and not the water control the board, that's what the top riders really enjoy, right? Because then they have the skill to maneuver the board where they want to go, what pocket do they want to get to. Foot steering plays a major role, right? So I feel like the higher advanced you are, the more you would want that forgivingness, and you're more relying on the secondary stability. And another analogy that Steve Miller, again, I'll use him because he's probably he's my business partner. He's also my main guy that we bounce ideas off of, right? He uses this analogy and I love it. Like we've all rented a car and the first time you pull out of the rental lot, you hit the brakes, you like practically go through the windshield sometimes. you know, and you're like, holy cow, you know, and you just have to learn your board. Like, so you get on a brand new board, right? I could jump on, you know, other brand's board, and my initial reaction is going to be like, whoa, this thing does not feel good, or this thing does not feel stable, or, and it's not a true statement. It's that I haven't adjusted to it. It's like brakes on a car. So the more you paddle your board, the more you become aware of the movements of the board and what it's going to do. And that's why I think this new Freedom Pro is so amazing. I mean, I'm sorry, but I feel like I'm tooting my own horn. I'm not trying to, but it's just, it's, I have had some of the top.
in part here
Yeah,
to toot
no,
your
no,
own
that's
horn.
okay. But I've had some like really top riders, and I'll bring Jeremy Vane as an example. JV, who's been racing forever, and I don't know if you guys know, but this, you know, JV was a really good racer back 2015, 14, like top pro in the United States. When he comes to me, gets the new Freedom Pro, and you know, and his eyes are like, whoa, this is the best board I've ever been on, and he's not just saying that to me, like he's telling everybody, like, and I'm just like, oh, thank God. Like, it felt great, right? Because he could have gotten the board and been like, I don't know, man, this thing doesn't feel like my old NSP used to, or whatever. I guess I can say that, right? Like, you know, so I'm seeing guys who are really advanced riders, and they're like, wow, this board is awesome. I can control like, it's all about being able to control the board and do what you want the board to do, and not the water do what the board make the board do what it wants to do. Does that kind of make sense to people?
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. So, and you're saying that like a lot of the elements that go into that are those rounder rails, maybe a deeper dugout, and I think that's interesting, because we are starting to see, at least I'm waiting for, and we're starting to see a little bit of a consolidation of
Yeah,
ideas in the
yeah.
sport as a whole, right? So I think a lot of those elements that you're describing, we can see in other board
Mm-hmm.
designs
Oh,
out
for
there
sure.
as the sport progresses. There's a little bit less of a like wacky extremes where the boards just don't look at all alike. So if you look at like maybe the top 20 boards across the line at Carolina Cup, they all have a lot of these similar elements. So that's cool to hear, I think, the
Yeah,
explanation behind why those things work.
yeah,
And it's not just because they paddle hard.
yeah, and I think I made this comment to you guys prior to we started recording. So if I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry. But if there was a perfectly designed board, everybody would have it. Like, if it, like, so I do have to preference the statement with saying, like, everything you do to a board, you do lose something. Every action has a reaction. So, you know, but my point is, we're trying to like get as close as possible to, like, you know, so I used to tell people like about the new Freedom Pro, it's a little bit tippier, you know, and now I kind of quit saying that to people, like, because it did feel a bit tippier to me initially, you know, but now that I've been on it, I'm like, wait a minute, this really isn't tippier. It's actually just different. And I've had plenty of my customers who have switched. I mean, a lot of customers. There's if you want a good used Freedom, now's probably the time to get it, because a ton of people are selling their Freedoms to get the new Freedom Pro. But I'm seeing them pop up used. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? And then I put two and two together. I'm like, oh, they're on the build list. I see what they're doing. They're trying to move their board before their board is built. But yeah, it's not tippier. I would tell people initially, like, yeah, it's just tippier. You got to get used to it, but it's really not. It's just a different feel. And I will talk about, like you said, with other board designs and dugouts. And when you said dugout, it really brought something to my mind that I kind of want to point out, because again, and this is just
You
my,
were
yeah,
resistant.
this is just my opinion again on dugouts. I fought them forever. Like, I was like, and mainly because I didn't want to build them. They're just a pain in the, I don't know what kind of family show this is, but you know what I'm saying. They're
It's
terrible.
not with Matt on the horn.
Yeah, they're freaking terrible to build, right? Like, you know, to laminate them and sand them, and you know, and all these things, and then you get done with it, and you're like, okay, now I got to drill freaking holes in this perfectly good board and laminate, you know, glass in carbon pipes, and it's just a lot, right? So I resisted it for a while, and then Josh Riccio just kept like, dude, you got to do it. You got to do it. And I was like, you know, he's like, I want to ride for you guys, but we got to design a dugout, you know? So it started back with Josh just really being persistent about it. And I'm glad he did, right? Because now I'm a very huge advocate of it. But with all that said, and what led me to this point is, we have actually started to bring our dugouts back up a little bit, because I think drainage of the deck plays a huge factor in racing. a huge. So we were talking about boards with the least amount of limitations, right? So, and my personal Freedom Pro that I paddle now, I've made some. And whenever I build a board for myself, I always do something different. Like, and I try to make it fairly dramatic. I went as deep as I felt I could go on my board, and yeah, it doesn't drain as well as all the others, you know. So our current dugout is only 4 inches deep.
All right. Can I ask a
Yeah,
question
yes,
about this? So I've noticed there's like two ways of doing a
yep,
dugout, right? Let's say you've got 2 inches of foam
mm-hmm,
between your feet and the bottom of the
yep,
board. Right now, you can have a wall that's 3 inches tall on top of
yep,
that, right? Or so there's a difference, like this distance can
yep,
shrink between your feet
100%.
and the bottom of the
Or the
board, so to
or the
speak, but the
rail.
wall can stay
Yep.
the same. Right. So I guess my question to you is when you make a dugout more or
Yeah.
less, right? Are you shrinking the distance between your feet and the water, or are you just raising the height of the
No,
sidewall?
the
Does that make
distance
sense?
between your feet and the water. So when
Okay.
I say limitations to everything, or building a board with least amount of limitations, these boards that have the a water line on a board, let's just say on average is about 3 inches. Okay, and that's an average number, but 2.7 to 3.2, like whatever, however you want to view it. When you start putting the decks below the water line, um, it's inherently just going to drain slower. And if you do a buoy turn and you're in a technical race, and when I did the technical race in the ICFs in Oklahoma, I did not ride my dugout for this exact reason. Um, you do a good buoy turn, you run back to the front, and this pile of water sloshes up on you, and now you got to take 4, 5, 6 strokes, and the water slowly drains. And then if you're getting hit with a side chop and the water starts kind of sloshing back and forth, and there's like just a lot of factors. Um, we have found if I the foam between our feet, I try to put the paddler right at the water level. So I shoot for
Okay.
I shoot for 3 inches of foam under the feet. This allows me to put in my drain holes, and I'm not going to give you the exact angles and everything that I use because I feel like it's a bit of a science. And most people who have our dugout will tell you like it stays dry and it drains fast. And my personal board that I decided to go 2 inches deeper just to see what it would, or maybe not a full 2 inches, but deeper, it's kind of a pain in the butt. And I'm like, crap, now I got to start figuring out scuppers or little like side rails. Cause if you're at a slower pace, or if you're just standing still, even the board starts to fill with water. So it's like, man, I'm standing at the start line and I got an inch of water in my board. Okay. And
Okay. Can I ask a devil's advocate question
sure. I
here?
love it. Yeah.
I'll happily defer to the
Yeah.
expert here, but so if I'm looking at longboat
Mm-hmm.
racing, whether it's a canoe or a surf
Okay.
ski, right? They've got scuppers,
Yeah.
venturis, some sort of hole in
Yeah.
the boat,
Yeah.
right? Same thing. When you're sitting there and you're not moving, they fill with
Yeah.
water. Not like you're not like sitting in a
Yeah.
bathtub, but there's water coming into
Sure.
the
Sure.
boat. And then when you get
It comes
moving,
out.
it slowly
Yeah.
drains out once
Yeah.
you're cruising. Is having water coming into your board detrimental if it's not happening at cruising
No, it's
speed?
not. No, not detrimental for that, for sure. But you are starting the race with an inch or so of water, which might be a pound and a half of water in your board or whatever. So
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I follow you
initial
there.
acceleration might be slower. Okay. And then the difference with these long boats and the canoes and the surf skis and all these things, they're not doing buoy turns, right? They're
For
not
sure.
riding a boat wake that you have the tail just plugged in there perfect where water can roll up the back of your board and fill your cockpit a little bit, right? So there's and
For
when
sure.
you talked about the initial design of being a fast haul, and we were talking about surf skis and all these designs, and my first thing I wanted to say was the difference is number one factor, they don't stand on them. It's like we're stand up paddleboarding. That's the name of our sport, stand up paddleboarding. So you have to design a board that pushes the limitations of speed and maneuverability, but is stable enough to stand on comfortably, right? And I think that's where some of the board designs, and I'm not even pinpointing anyone specific, but some of the board designs have missed the boat on like, yeah, you may be like this. I'm not a naval engineer. I'm not any kind of engineer in that factor, but I paddle. I'm a paddler. You're missing the fact that people are human powered with a paddle, and you have to stand on it. You have to balance on it.
Yeah, those are all great
I mean,
points.
and so,
I think
yeah. So,
you touched on it earlier, right? But the foot steering part's a big part too, right? Like we don't have a
right.
rudder,
Huge. Foot steering
right? So
plays,
that plays a huge part in the design as
I
well.
mean, any of the pros who watch this, and I know all the pros around the world are going to watch this podcast because you guys are going to be the biggest podcast in the world soon. But um,
Yeah, we hope so.
they're all going to say that drafting and plays probably one of the biggest roles in racing at a high level. Look at Carolina Cup. You miss that first draft train of 15 guys or whatever it usually starts out as. Rarely does somebody ever come from the second draft train to win the race. The winner almost always comes from that first draft pack. Okay. And there are a ton of paddlers in that draft pack that may not be able to keep up with paddler number top 5 guys in the lead. The last 8-10 guys behind there, you put them on a one-on-one race in open water and they're not staying with those guys, right? But they have the ability to draft. Drafting plays a huge role. So we design a board that foot steers well and drafts well. And I hear that from people all the time. And I love hearing it. It's like, God, this board drafts so good. And that's like that's probably one of the bigger compliments I ever get from somebody is, wow, this new board drafts so good. And I'm like, yes, because this is what we want, right? We want the board to draft well, catch the littlest bumps well, anything that may give you an advantage over somebody who's, again, at your same paddle level.
Totally makes sense. And do you feel like the elements that make your board good in other conditions are the same elements that allow a board to draft well?
Yes. Similar to bump riding,
Cool.
nose shape for sure plays a huge role in it. Tail rocker plays a huge role in it. I want a board that you can make minimal foot adjustments, and have the board kind of make decent adjustments without a lot of foot movement, if that makes sense. Did that make okay?
It does. So you're like standing in the sweet spot
Yeah.
for a prolonged period
And
of
once
time.
you learn,
you
learn that sweet spot, just little shifts of your body weight or things of that nature can make your board do what you want it to do. Once you become, at that level, and so.
So,
Go.
we've talked a lot about all the input from the pros, and I think everything you've described, I mean, again, I'll put myself as a very average Joe paddler. I find beneficial paddling one of your boards. The amazing thing is there's flying fish all over the place. They're like snowflakes. I mean, no two are the same.
Yeah.
There
Right.
might be some with the same numbers, but the coloration, the resin tinting's different, etc. It's sort of you lose track of that sometimes. You see so many, and at that race where there's a predominance of flying fish we were just describing at the beginning of the podcast, it was like they were all flying fish. You would not know it looking at the field unless you like look closely. I mean, you can tell when you know a flying fish by looking immediately, but a layman would be like, wow, there's so many different types of boards. It's like, well, 80% of these are sort of one type. Give us some insight. You probably, no kidding, more than, with the possible exception of Bark, but you've probably had more conversations with individual unique paddlers about what they're looking for. And I know a lot of what you have to do sometimes is help correct some of their misinterpretation or misconceptions about what a board can and cannot do. But at the same time, you also
100%.
get really good insight into what average people are looking for. I mean, just maybe you could share with us sort of some of your takeaways from interacting with some, I don't know, was it 300 plus people now who you've made custom boards for?
It's pretty funny with that statement. You're only off by about 700. So we'll probably build our this year.
So close.
Sometime at the end of this year.
I was just talking about myself, my 300 boards.
Sometime at the end of this year, we're gonna build our 1,000th board, 1,000th board, whatever. You know what I'm saying? So
wow.
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy.
I had no idea.
Yeah, we produce about 200 a year. So I mean, this is a great way to like kind of just explain what we really are, if you guys don't mind. Because when I say custom boards,
go for it.
No,
when I say custom boards, the last thing I think of is resin tint color, right? Like outside of us being able to make additional money by people adding a ton of colors on their boards, sometimes I see boards people design on our website, because our website has like a 3D designer. I'm like, oh wow, They must have failed kindergarten art class. Like it you know, and I know there's probably some customers that are going to watch this and be like, he's probably talking about me, but
John, it's like I said, it's like I've said to you, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
should, right. Just because we have options on the website, it's not like a car. It's not a Lexus. Like the more options you add, the better the board. It's like, no, you might want to, you don't need 7 handles and 4 sets of bungee cords. Like let's, but anyway, I'm kind of being, but anyway, so let me get back to my point. So when I met custom board builder, my initial response, or my initial thought rather, sorry, was volume, volume mainly, like, right. And the board design, the depth of the deck, um, and the thickness of the board, and obviously the width of the board, right? Because most manufacturers offer maybe, I don't even know nowadays, maybe 5 models. If does that sound about right? Somewhere between like a 20-inch wide and a 28-inch wide. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
So um, we tweak. I speak with every customer, so that's as crazy as it is. Like literally every single person who's ever ordered a board from us speaks with me, and it still remains that way, and it will continue to remain that way as long as I'm in charge. And so when somebody orders a board on our website, I always tell them, because we get this question all the time, like how long does it take? What's the lead time? And right now we're at 3 months, right? So I'm like, oh, it's 3 months. They're like, man, I didn't know it takes that long to build a board. I'm like, well, it's the 25 people in front of you, and I've had this conversation with you, Adam. Like last summer, I think we were at 68 boards on order, and I'm like, oh my God. And people are going, yeah, well, you got to wait 6 months to get your flying fish, and it's like, so we've worked really hard on that. So let me plug us for that, because the crew that works for me, like me and all the guys that work for me, and the girls, because we have women that work here as well. We have worked our butts off to get the build list down to a manageable amount. So we're now at 3 months, and that is a solid number. So anyway, okay, enough about that. So everybody talks to me, right? Every single customer talks to me. When I cut a board on our CNC machine, it has what's called a G code, and it's basically a series of numbers that tells the CNC machine what to cut. I have to start deleting G codes off my computer because there's so many G codes. Like a Freedom 1423, I might have like 10 G codes for a Freedom 1423, right? Because one might have a 1-inch deck, a 2-inch deck, and then somebody be like, hey, can you do a 3-inch deck? Like, sure, I can do a 3-inch deck. Like, so that's the beauty, I think, of ordering from us, is we really do fine tune every board. Now, what hurts us with that is I get people that go, yeah, I tried one of your boards. A buddy of mine had one and I tried it. I didn't really like it. I'm like, oh, really? Who was it? He's like, oh, it was Joe Smith or whatever. And I'm like, oh, well, how big are you? He's like, oh, I'm 190 pounds. I'm like, oh, wow, Joe weighs 125 and or whatever, or the best one I get is like, the best
Sure,
one I
right.
get is the guy like my size, 185, 190. And he rode like some girl's board who's 110 pounds. He's like, yeah, it just didn't feel good to me. I sunk the board a lot. And I'm like, oh, so it's not like, it's like you said, Adam, there's so many out there, but they're all unique. They're all a little bit different, right? So it can kind of hurt us in a way, because it's really hard for us to we don't have a dealer network, like a real solid dealer network where somebody can just like go try our boards, right? A lot of it's just off of like word of mouth, or maybe it's off of like they're at a race and they see one there and they're like, oh, let me jump on your board. So um, there's negatives and positives to being that custom, but that sort of is how it works for us.
What are the trends you're seeing? I mean, people come to you going, "Hey, I would need this or I want this," and I know you counsel them one way or the other. But like, what would you say is the trend over the last 2-3 years for what people are asking for or inquiring about?
I think stability is still big for a lot of people, especially beginners. It's, I want to make sure the board is stable, you know. But I do feel, and a lot of this probably has to do with me, is more and more people, I try to talk them into an all around board, which is our Freedom, because I feel like the speed difference in pure flat water, and I mean, again, when we say flat water, we mean flat water, you know. The speed difference is just not that noticeable unless you're a really top athlete, maybe. And the person that comes to my mind is like a Daniel Jasulio, right? It's like, I think in Oklahoma, he rode the sprint and it was like, he blew away the field. He had a great start, and you guys did video coverage of it, how he kind of took Jake Portwood around the bridge and all this stuff. But once he got in his clean water, he was gone, right? Board's designed great for that. He had the perfect board for that race. And Jake was riding a Freedom, one of our Freedoms. But how often are we racing in that controlled of an element? Not too often, right? Because, so anyway, I talk a lot of people towards an all-around board. I tell them this, hey, I'd love to sell you 2 boards. Do you want to buy 2 boards? Because then we can get you a flat water board and an all-around board. But if you really want to buy 1 board, I think like the all-around model is the way to go. And for no matter where you paddle. Because even in lakes in South and North Carolina, there's a lot of boat wakes and there's a lot of jet skiers and there's a lot of stuff that, you have wind everywhere you go. So I personally am a huge believer in like an all-around shape, So,
can I ask you a follow-up
sure.
question? Because this is something Adam hears me talk about this all the time. But like, coming from a science background, we don't see a lot of like numbers or data in the paddling world, and I get it, right? Like, a lot of things are proprietary. We don't want to give away top
Sure.
secret information and all that. But what kind of differences do you see in speed? Let's say, but all other things being equal, same conditions, same paddler or whatever, between maybe a Freedom Pro and the Free Glide V2 in flat water. Like, does that, because obviously there's benefits.
You're talking probably less
stuff,
than
right?
a tenth of a mile of an hour.
Okay,
Like,
so you're splitting
hairs for real. Now, if you put things in perspective, and if it's a Chattajack race, let's say, and it's a flat water Chattajack,
sure,
and you're gaining 5 seconds a mile, okay, 32-mile race, 5 seconds a mile, it's a pretty significant amount, right? So it is a difference, but it is minimal. And I always believe that the advantages you get from a board like a Freedom or an all-around board, that you can foot steer, catch a bump, all the other factors can offset that minuscule amount of speed, right? So,
yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head too. That's like, it's very contingent, right? You said if it's a flat Chattajack,
yeah.
Right? Like, everybody pictures Chattajack as being flat, but anyone who's done that race knows that is not normally the
especially
case. Right? It happens,
especially the start, right? You have 800 paddlers, like,
dude, it's nuts. Washing machine to end all washing
for like
machines.
3 miles, 4 miles. It's crazy. So
for sure.
That's my take.
There you have it,
my
folks.
take on it. It's not like I'm not telling people to buy a Free Glide V2. Like Derek in Canada up at Paddle Sport Performance, man, he sells a ton of Free Glide V2s up there. They love that. They still like that feel of a displacement hull, and it's a feel. It is a feel. People are like, this board just feels this board's faster. I'm like, nah, it feels faster to you, because the planing hull sometimes is hard to wrap around your head. We always use this. We always tell people, trust the clock, trust your watch, don't go off of feel so much as, or look of how the water's coming off the bow, or it's not slicing the water. A displacement hull board has a limited hull speed, right? It does have a limited hull speed regardless of the power, where a planing hull is unlimited, right? It really is unlimited. So if somebody has the motor,
this is why you see Connor Baxter racing his all-star
100%. Connor is the ideal person to paddle an all-around board, or a board that has some nose rocker to it, and because his stroke rate and his sprint ability to just lift the board out of the water and plane it is probably second to none. He's the greatest paddler in our sport. So that's why that board works so well for him, right? But you put him in a long distance flat water race, and he's not going to do that well. And that's, it's just not his forte. And that board's not designed for that, But I think he would probably tell you that he agrees with me as far as, like, most of the time, the advantages you get from an all around board outweigh that little bit of speed on a displacement hull flat board. That's just my opinion. Again, there's a lot of people that probably argue. A lot of people will argue with me, but I know our team riders, I think the only one that really liked the Free Glide V2 and for a little while, was Erie Tenorio. And I think it's mainly because he beat Danny Ching one time on it, and he thought, like, oh my God, I beat Danny on this board. It's, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, well, great, Erie, but so even he now has the new Freedom Pro, and he's like, oh, bro, I need one for Brazil. I need one for Europe. I need one, you know, and I'm like, so it's, yeah. So, you know, it's,
Can I
All
tell
right,
my
so
favorite Erie story?
yeah, I guess.
Uh,
Yeah.
so this is, and this kind of goes to define the what we were talking about with the average Joes and the waterways there in the Jupiter, Florida vicinity. Our buddy Kelly, John, he and Ed, two of the local guys who are, you know, like me, like sort of middle packers, were out doing some interval training one day, and they just spot Erie, and he comes over to him, and I think he was wrapping up training or warming up for training or whatever he was doing, but Erie was in like a long training one and found these two guys. I think it was those two. Anyways, Kelly tells the story really well, and it's fun with his accent. But so Erie says, "Hey guys, what's up?" And they're like, "Oh, we're doing some interval training." Go, "That's cool, man. I'll go with you." And they're like, "It's us, dude. Like, this
Yeah.
apples and oranges. Like, you're world class. We are, you know, barely Jupiter class." And so, you know, it's like 1 minute, 30-second rest, 1 minute, 30-second rest. So Erie goes, "Okay, no, I'll do it with you." Kelly tells a story. The, you know, alarm goes off on the little phone timer, and he's just like, "Listen, just like, don't let yourself be embarrassed. You got Erie right next to you. You know, you don't want to be like the total nerd." So he like digs in, gives it hell, and like can see Erie's board next to him, but you know, it's not passing him, and he's like, "Oh my god, like the training's paying off. You know, I've been working at this all winter long or whatever." And they finish, and he's like dying, but he doesn't want to show it. Looks up here, he's like, "Yeah, that was really cool, man." You know, and he's like, "Okay, like it's 30 seconds is counting down." And he's like, "Look, I know he's going to catch me on this one, but just still, like, just keep it respectable." And he, like, you know, it goes 1 minute, the clock starts, he starts hammering, and he can see the nose of Erie's board, and like it slowly starts to pass him. But like, you know, it's like the minutes counting down. He's like, "Oh my god," I'm like, "I'm not going to hold him off, but like this is respectable. Like I can't believe how good I've gotten." And Erie slowly passes him, and he looks over, and Erie's on one foot, looking at him, smiling as
Yeah.
as he's in a dead sprint
Yeah.
about to throw up. Um, different strokes for different folks, quite literally. I love that
Yeah.
story though, because those are two guys probably on the same model board, completely different athletes,
Yeah.
completely different use cases.
Yeah. Yeah. Erie's a unique athlete. I remember, I think it was, well, it was Dave Bainey and I at Carolina Cup, maybe 2018 or so. And he said, you know, we just got to chatting a little bit, and we didn't really know each other well at the time. And I was, he was telling about his dark horse. It was Itzel Delgado. He's like, "Yeah, we have a dark horse. He's this guy, Itzel Delgado." I'm like, "Yeah, we got this dark horse. His name's Erie Tenorio." And now you see Itzel and Erie, and they're both, you know, top paddlers in the world. And it's pretty cool to because they were dark horses back then. I remember Chris Parker, you know, that's what he used to call Erie, was
Yeah.
the dark horse, you know, from Brazil. But yeah, he's a special athlete for sure. We're super blessed. And if we had another hour, I could tell you how I met him and how I took him under my wing and all that, but that'd have to be for another podcast. But that was a unique story in itself. But yeah,
Yeah.
Erie's special for sure. But
We need. I said I was going to do it last time we mentioned Erie. We got to get a couple of his videos posted at some point, because if you don't follow him on Instagram, you're missing out. Like he is. I say he's the rodeo cowboy of SUP on his Instagram channel.
yeah, he has an Instagram video that he filmed in Detroit when we were up there for the Belle Isle race, and he has over, I think, almost 2 million views on it now. And it's one of those things where he said, I think the caption just said, "Am I doing this right?" And he literally paddled, he jumped on his board backwards, paddled it in reverse, and then like his board went one way, his body went the other way, and he basically did a buoy turn. And next thing you know, he was sprinting forward. And I think it got 2 million views because people kept rewatching it to see what he just did. You know what I mean? Like, how, like,
I'm one of those people. It took me like 4 views to just let my brain process what I was seeing.
And he's like he is a circus acrobat. That's what he did in Brazil when he was a young kid, was he was in the circus. So he's an acrobat. So he just takes that onto his board skills.
Yeah, no,
That
he's
shows.
amazing.
Yeah. Sorry, you mentioned your boards being
Yeah.
lighter as another like early vision for the company.
Yeah.
I think maybe this could be like another interesting topic here, in the sense that like you always hear the idea that more mass maybe conserves momentum
Mhm.
better,
Mhm.
right? what about, aside from the obvious off-water benefits of having a lighter board, it's easier on and off the car and in and out of the garage and stuff, but what merits have you seen from having a lighter board?
I feel like probably the biggest difference is having that gear or that second gear. You know, say got to make a move on a draft train, or you make a buoy turn and the draft train in front of you has lost you by a board or two, and being able to just accelerate rapidly to get to that board. I mean, to get to the next board in
Mm,
front of you. Um, I think you're right about a board being too light, and so we try to keep them, you know, not too light. I was building very light boards in the beginning, and they're durable, which is crazy. Like people think they're eggshells, but they're really not. They're extremely durable. It's just that we try to keep the weight now. So this is a question I get all the time: what do your boards weigh? And so here's a great, if watch this podcast, and then you don't have to ask me the question. On average, because it's hard for me to tell you what your board is going to weigh when it's done, but on average, the board weighs 1 pound less than the width.
okay, so
I like
so
that.
let's say a 25-inch wide board will weigh 24-ish
Yeah, but
pounds.
and then I'll follow that up usually with customers by like, but the wider boards, like the 27s, 28s, anywhere from like 25 and up, the ratio gets bigger because it's just at that point, it more becomes about volume. So if the board has 300 and something liters, so even our 28-inch wide boards weigh about 25 pounds, maybe 25 and a half pound,
Oh,
you know
okay.
what I mean? So, but I'm talking mainly in that like 24 to like 19-inch range. Right. And obviously volume plays a big factor. So if I'm building a board for a female rider who's, low hundreds, 105 to 115, 120, her board is going to be almost 2 pounds lighter um, than the width.
Then the
Yeah.
width.
Because she has
Gotcha.
much less volume.
Interesting.
And we can talk about, I mean, there is such thing as too little volume, no matter how much they weigh, right? So if a light girl orders a 26-inch wide board, I can't make it 150, or 220 liters. You know what I mean? The board would be too thin to perform the way it's designed to perform. So there's limitations. I get that question all the time from people that order wider boards. Like, well, my friend told me that my volume should be this, and it's like, quit looking at those charts online, because there's volume charts online and all this stuff. And I try to explain to them that every board is different. Nose volume, tail volume, and all that stuff. But that's your weight. That's your
Yeah.
weight. So we're typically, and we used to be lighter than that. We used to almost every board was coming in 2 pounds lighter than the width at one point. And so we have actually reinforced the boards now in areas that we weren't reinforcing it before, which has now made the board more rigid. So I think that's the other thing I hear from people all the time is like very little flex on our boards at all. Like they feel very stiff, which translates to speed because you don't lose any energy in the board being flexy. Um, so yeah, we try to put the right materials in the right spots, and every board is hand laminated. We don't use paint, so that's a huge difference. All our boards are colored with resin tint. Gives them a unique look. Not everybody likes it. I get a lot of questions like, "Can you make mine shiny and neat like my old board?" And I say, "Nope. You'd have to order that from Asia if you want that, because we don't paint the boards." So it's just my thing.
Is that a weight
It's a
thing?
it's a
That's
it's
just
a
a
lot
weight
of
thing?
things. It's a weight thing, but it's also, in order for me to paint the boards, I would have to have a paint booth and permits and certain licensing from the
Mm,
county, and it's a whole
sure.
nother, but it is a weight thing. Like I've always just been from day one, like I just want resin tint. Like I don't care about cosmetics of the board. I'm not into the European styling of like sharp pin lines and graphics and crazy stuff. Like I said, I'd build every board white, you know. We're going to have stock boards coming out soon, and I can't believe I just publicly said that, but we're going to have stock boards coming out.
Oh,
Yeah.
dang.
Gonna hold you to it.
Yeah, I know.
Wait, you heard it here first, Sup World. This is our first
Yeah,
breaking
exclusive.
news, Adam. We've
Yeah.
officially
they're,
made
they're
it.
still
An
gonna
hour
they're
and 4 minutes in,
they're
we finally got a nugget.
they're still they're
Right.
still they're still going to be manufactured right here in the fish tank, but they're just going to probably be solid gray resin tint. Just that's it, one color, and we're going to offer maybe three sizes, and that's going to be kind of our price point board, because we want to be competitive in pricing. And I think Adam and I have had conversations about this on a personal level, because it is a business that we're trying to run. And I have 6 employees, and I have overhead, a lot of overhead, and But we still want to try to keep boards priced competitively, So I think the introduction of stock boards is going to help us do that. We're going to be able to offer that. I don't even know if I want to put a price out because I'm not 100% sure yet, but it'll be below what you would pay for other stock boards. Okay.
Is there any other info you want to share about the stock board thing while we're on the topic, or are we holding that close to the
No,
chest
it'll
for now?
probably just be freedoms. I can tell you that. Probably just be
Okay.
freedoms. I don't even know if it'll be dugouts, because the 2-inch drop deck that we do, like a sub dock deck, has a Venturi vent or Venturi drain underneath the handle. Works great. Wide range of people can paddle it. I think anyone who's going to want a dugout and things like that is going to want a custom board anyway. So I think it'll probably
Sure.
be the Freedom 2-inch deck is what I can tell you guys. And we'll offer it in 3 different sizes and get people on the water quicker, which has always been a big thing for us. Like, people order their board and my phone rings once a month for 3 months. Where am I at? Where am I at?
Just
I'm
once?
like,
Just once a month?
yeah, well, some customers once a week, but yeah, I will, it'll take some pressure off of me, hopefully, and our team. And, but that is the 100% plan this year, is to have stock boards. We tried it a couple of years ago, and we would always pre-sell them before they actually hit the website. So this year we have to make some tweaks to that, where we just force them into production. But we're gonna make it happen. I'm saying it live here.
Hey,
All right.
some free branding guidance for you. You could call it the Freedom Schmo.
The Freedom Schmo. Oh man, Adam.
Oh
Yeah, I don't
no.
think that'll fly.
Yeah, and Adam gets a 1 penny per
Yeah,
sale.
exactly. Maybe we'll put like a vinyl decal of Adam's profile or his face on there. Get your head,
My
your
bald
bald
just
head
a
on
round,
there.
a sphere,
Yeah,
little tic tac.
All right. If it comes with that, I'll get
yeah,
one. But otherwise,
yeah.
I don't know.
So,
Hey, John. Before we go, you've had a really interesting background, just period, like professionally. I mean, playing ball. You're talking about the boat cat. Just if you could give us like the summary, because
oh god,
this to me it's interesting and it
yeah.
does inform like you
Say,
as a
oh
full-time racer.
God.
Well, no, I mean, but like this is not sort of the normal, like, oh yeah, I started working in a board shop, out of college or out of high school. This is like you've got a weird journey that you took
Yeah,
to
well,
get here.
yeah, I'll keep it pretty simple. My dad, when I was younger, basically told me he worked for a company for 25 years and got laid off when I was about 17 years old, maybe 16 years old. Put in 25 years with the company, got laid off, and he said, "Son, don't ever work for somebody else. Figure out how to earn, be the boss, be the leader, So there was that. Okay. And I've had jobs where I work for people, obviously, early, but that ended quickly. So then my second thing I'll say is I'm terrible about everything I do. I want to do it to my absolute best. Like I'm just one of those guys. So I just took up disc golf like 2 months ago. Holy crap. Now I'm like hooked on, I'm like, okay, you got to keep this a hobby, man. We don't need flying fish discs and. But anyway, my point is, so back to my story. Everything I do, I love to do and take it to my fullest. All my hobbies seem to turn into careers. As a kid, I loved baseball. Practiced like I was the kid that was in the batting cage all summer long, all winter long. Practice, practice, practice. Was fortunate enough to be drafted by the Colorado Rockies. Played 3 years with them in their minor league system, and so that was a really cool adventure. And then when I got home, I'm like, okay, now
Yeah,
what am I going to
cup
do?
of
And I'm like,
coffee.
well, I like to, yeah, a little cup of coffee. Like it was a little tiny taste of Denver, and then the next thing was I got home. I'm like, well, what do I love to do now? Like, I love to fish. Okay, well, let's go get your captain's license from the Coast Guard and start taking people fishing. So I did that for 15 years, and then kind of got burned out of that for a little bit. And one of my clients actually at the time said, well, dude, what are you going to do? Are you going to just be a fishing guide your whole life? I'm like, no, I got to get out of this. Skin cancer at, 38 years old and all that crap. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, I love to paddleboard. He's like, well, why don't you, is there anybody around here selling them? And I'm like, no, there's a place in Jupiter, but there's nowhere up here in Stuart. So I opened a paddleboard shop. And that's kind of how the whole thing started is I, sold boards out of my shop and, and then realized retail is a really tough business to be in. And I thought I could start building boards better than somebody else. So we started building boards and putting them in our shop. And then we noticed we couldn't keep them on the shelves, our recreational boards, which we still sell, like recreational boards called the Glider. So we're, like, wow, people really like these boards. They paddle well, they're light, da, 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 da. So it then transitioned into just like full-time manufacturing. So yeah, I've never really had a real job. Is that what you're trying to say, Adam? Like, I was basically a professional baseball player, a fly fishing guide, and now I build stand-up paddle boards. So yeah, I've been super blessed.
Yeah. So when do you think you're gonna grow up, John
I
Meskauskas?
just turned 50 like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So yeah, I guess I'll maybe start thinking about it soon. I don't know.
Nah,
No,
nah, it's
yeah,
overrated, I
yeah,
think.
exactly. So my body's telling me I need to slow down, but my brain's not. So,
It's
but
all that disc golf. It's going to kill you.
yeah, dude, trust me. Oh my God, don't get me started. I'm so addicted. It's crazy. I've watched every YouTube video.
Need
I've
like,
watched every YouTube video in the world, which has now inspired me though to now start filming in here more and doing a little more
Yeah.
coverage in here
mm,
because Adam, you did a video in our first factory like 5 years ago, and people still reference that video to me. They're like, "Yeah, I saw this video on YouTube, and I was intrigued by the board and how you build it." And they order boards. So I'm like, wow, this actually works. So I need to get on the YouTube and or the social or the vlogging or whatever you guys call it. I don't know. So maybe
I'm not sure either.
this might be the start of it. This podcast.
This
Who
is the
knows?
launch point.
Yeah, this is the launch point. I might
Hey,
become YouTube famous. Who knows?
hey, well, listen. We've taken now. I'm looking at the clock. Over an hour and 11 minutes of your time, and someone's going to see this and be like, "This is why my board isn't getting done on time." You're going to get 2 calls a month from that person.
Yeah, yeah. I hear you.
Hey, and I saw Jamie walking behind you. Say hi to him for me. There's such a great crew
Yeah.
down there. That
Yeah,
works in the shop,
he
but
works
also just
every
in the yeah.
he works every Saturday and Sunday. So nobody can complain. If anybody tries to say we're, now, not to say they don't take days off during the week if the surf is good, but you know, but yeah, he works every weekend. So yeah, he just finished laminating a couple boards. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Hey, man, this was super fun.
man, thank you guys. This was awesome. Yeah. You told me it's going to take like
yeah,
20,
thanks for
you
being
told me it was
on.
going to take like 20 minutes. I don't know what, it wasn't my fault. No,
Did we?
I'm
Oh, I
joking.
don't. I
No,
don't
I'm
remember
joking.
being a party to
No, I'm
that. I
joking.
don't
Yeah.
know.
No,
Yeah.
You can't say that, or no one else will
no,
come on our
I'm
show.
joking.
I
No, I'm
didn't do
joking.
my math right. No, I know we can go for hours and hours on this stuff, but John,
Yeah.
listen, man, we'll let you go do your thing. Always great to
Yeah,
see you in person or otherwise. And we'll catch
man.
up soon.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much, guys. I really do. Keep up the good work. And on USA Sup is freaking awesome. I love it. I'm a member. I'm one of the founding members. I have a sticker that proves it.
You are.
So
Right.
yeah, yeah.
You are.
So
No,
Heck
we
yeah. And
we appreciate
we
it and
appreciate it, man.
spread the gospel down there. There's at least 140
yeah,
other people who I saw in the water who could be founding members as well. I know some of them are. Many of them
yeah.
are.
Well, tell everybody who watches this, or I guess I'll say it. If you're in the area, hit us up. We'll take you on a shop tour and kind of show you around. And we love doing that around here. So it's open. You just have to set an appointment. That's all. So
That's awesome.
Sweet. Well,
All
thanks
right.
again for your time, man. We really
yeah,
appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks,
thanks,
John.
guys. I appreciate it. Talk to you later.
Take care.
Bye.
I could talk to that guy forever. I could just grill him with questions, and I always have more questions about boards. I'm sure many people do, but it's cool to be able to ask somebody the reasoning behind things and get not only like a truthful answer, right? But it's my opinion. There's no wrong way or right way to do this thing yet. Cause I think he put it well, right? That like, if there was a right board, everyone would be on it.
Yeah,
And
and
they would win
you also
everything.
made the point that we are slowly coalescing around a right version of a
There are
board.
some wrong things, right?
Yeah. But the idea of, although his comments about the dugout and the water drainage, because it's true. I mean, a buoy turn, in order to get the Venturi effect, you need speed, and you need a certain amount of speed. And
Yeah.
I mean, it is one of the conundrums. So that was sort of an interesting one that I don't think I had thought about that much before. Well, I thought about the drain holes, placement thereof, and all that kind of stuff. But you can get too deep potentially, and
Yeah.
in a dugout, and depending on what conditions you're in, if it's a tech race, a really deep dugout, I mean, to hear John's description, is going to be a liability versus potentially like a Carolina Cup where you're always in motion and you've only got a handful
Right.
of turns.
There are no turns at the graveyard race, right? Like you go through I mean, you are turning, but they're
Yeah.
like, long sweeping turns. This past year they had one buoy turn, but it was like a 70-degree turn. So
Yeah.
most people didn't even step back on their board. But yeah, like I guess different boards for different purposes. So just try to pick one,
Yeah.
as John put it, with the least evil to it.
Yeah. And I tell, like, when people, friends who are kind of newer to the sport come to me and ask, like, what board, it's kind of like you can't, my feeling is you can't buy a bad board anymore. You could buy a board
True.
that's like wrong for what you want to do it for. But if you've done your research and you sort of know, like, oh, this is my use case. And I think John was alluding to that as well. Like, you want an all around board by and large. Like most
Yeah.
people, unless you are on a very small flat lake, or a still river kind of thing.
A question I wish I would have thought of to ask him. So maybe I
let's
can
call him
ask
back
him after the fact. Right. Is he was saying that, the difference in speed between the all around board, the Freedom Pro for them, and the Free Glide and flat water is, less than 1/10 of a mile an hour. And that a displacement hole is restricted by
hull speed.
Thank you. And a planing hole is not. But I imagine that only holds true if you have the engine to make that happen over a given distance, right? So for somebody like Kim, who's one of the best distance paddlers on the planet, right? Her ability to keep a planing like hull in a planing like state for a long period of time is really different than somebody coming into the sport in year 2 or something, right?
Yeah.
Where they, over a given distance, 10K or longer, might be faster on a displacement hull that allows them to just get that speed easier rather than keep a higher speed, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think that he actually acknowledged exactly that point, which is like when he's talking about Chattajack, which is over distance, it will be faster, like, but significant distance, and it's flat and significant distance.
Right.
Like, yes, it is faster, but you start putting in 1-2 turns, multiple boat wakes, and now you're beginning to lose. And that goes back to the do the least amount wrong concept,
right?
Which I, look, anyone who's watching this who's thinking about buying a board or what's the right one. I mean, at the end of the day, the takeaway is, what's the reality of the water that you are actually going to be paddling? What's the reality of your fitness level? Like what's the reality of what the fitness levels you can attain and what your overall athletic ability is going to be. Because at the end of the day, it is, and John said it's stability. Like that has to be your baseline factor. And
all right, so here's a hot take for you.
Yeah.
I have no numbers to back this up, but I think how you paddle should affect what board you choose. And so let me take this, give you an example, right? So like someone like Bruno Husulio, who has a very high stroke rate compared to his peers at the pointy end of the male division, right? So over the course of an entire 11 cities event through all 5-day stages, his average stroke rate was 58 strokes a minute. So think about that. That's right? Nuts. For 220 miles, it's 58 strokes a minute, right? That's pretty crazy, right? So to me, the things that are important for Bruno are a light board, which he's famous for being on light boards, like the Nello before, now the X Bionic thing that he's got going on. They're the lightest boards out there for the most part. He has a really stiff paddle so that it doesn't take time for the force to be applied to the water. It's just right now. And the blade design he uses is totally square on the bottom so that it's power right now, and then he's just out of the water. And that he could take advantage of a planing hole more than somebody, let's say like Danny or Tituan, who are famous for like a very long, relaxed, slower stroke rate. Not that it's slow, it's still faster than most of us, right? But slow compared to their peers, can take advantage of a board that's maybe has different attributes. Like the NSP boards are famous for very round rails, very efficient, very slippery, and that you don't see like the Ninja from NSP, their flat water board. While it has become more all water friendly, the walls are taller, there's more volume. They just changed the tail this past year to make sure that the water doesn't come in quite as much. but it's still geared at the paddlers who are paddling their boards. And I think that's like an inherent bias that we don't talk about in athlete and board pairing. That I think that's a part of when you're looking for a board for yourself is like you said, how fit am I? How do I prefer to paddle? And if you're new at paddling, you may not be able to answer those
Right.
questions for yourself yet. But just food for thought. That's something that keeps me up at night. Does that kind of? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree that there is technique, and I think I would almost say even more than how you paddle, it's body type. I for instance, am slowly. I've got long arms. I'm sort of quasi lanky, relatively thin. There's a stroke that is really sort of most efficient for me, that I did not start doing. You know, that's not what I started off, and it's just sort of you find kind of your biology will take you to that place, and your biology and sort of like what feels good and what you like doing. But that is to say, I agree. But it's, I mean, you start thinking. We just spent over an hour talking with John. I mean, the amount of sort of food for thought that he had for us, in terms of,
Yep.
the puts and takes that you have with the board. And again, he's a custom board manufacturer. Like, these are conversations he's having with every single. I can't believe how many boards are coming up on 1,000. So, you know,
It's a
it's
lot of
like 900
conversations.
plus conversations with people going, I feel like I do this. This is my paddle stroke. What do you, what, um, it, that's why we wanted to have him on in part. USA SUP member, great contributor to community. Other reasons to have him on, but his sort of touch point with the actual paddler is significant, and he's fast. Like he's an actual
Yeah,
racer.
he's being cool about it, but yeah, he can move.
He can move. There was a point in time where I was like, I've never been as fast as him, but like I was like almost like he was super busy and like had sort of like lost elements of his speed. It was like a month, and then he started posting these speeds, and I was like, oh, that's it. I'll never be able to
Yeah,
draft
he
him again.
posts some of his times.
They're
I
going
think we're
fast, man.
friends on Garmin, and I occasionally take a peek. Yeah, he can move, man. Yeah,
Yeah,
like you said, aside from Danny Ching, he's probably the fastest board brand owner out there.
yeah.
You know what? I bet Dave Baney can still move pretty good.
No doubt. I'm actually but that comment was partly hoping to like inspire some kind of like, Sven, Mark, John, Dave,
Right,
Danny,
sure.
like showdown, Ellen.
That would be great.
It would be fun, right? Like, that'd be a good charity event. We should get them to do that one day. Hey, there
That
was
would
a
be
lot
pretty sick.
said, just about. I mean, the thing I really like about what John was saying, he's very realistic about it, the deficiencies of a board and all that kind of stuff. You and I have talked about this a lot. There is a lot, and it's easy for him to do that. Like, he's got, he operates on word of mouth by and large, as a custom board builder will. But some of the board builders who are building at a much larger scale have to move a lot more boards for their model, which is fine. Great boards too. We're seeing, and this is true for paddles as well, the marketing that has been going on for a while now is beginning to sort of divorce from reality, even if it's just board names. And I'll pick on Starboard for a minute because the Sprint's a great board. John actually alluded to that, did a great job, for Daniel Hosoyo, for instance, in OKC. Was a difference maker potentially. Connor Baxter on the All-Star. Connor Baxter is sprinting on the All-Star, right? And the distance guys are off for Starboard are often using the sprint. And it kind of goes to show you that, like, sometimes the marketing is divorced from the actual reality of what's going on there. And you see new paddlers coming in, and if you don't order, and lots of people won't, and might not even be the right board for them, won't order a flying fish, right? The vast majority will go buy a stock board from one of the other manufacturers. So they're not going to benefit from having a conversation with the actual shaper. Who knows that, like, when I deliver this, they're going to
Sure.
be able to call me and be like, dude, this isn't right. So, like, there's a lot on the line there in those initial conversations. So it's really the community stuff. But then there's also just a lot of, and I think you see this in Facebook forums and that sort of thing, where people are like, oh yeah, no, this board will make you, a board length faster, or this paddle will make you 4%, 3 to 5% faster. And we just heard all of the variables, which should really kind of make people step back and pause and go, lay the marketing aside, get your feet on the board and go paddle.
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, right? And I think to give maybe Starboard the benefit of the doubt in particular, right, is that like the sprint has been around since I want to say like 2014 ish. I could be off by a year or two in
Mhm.
either direction there. But I think it also shows how much we're learning about the sport
Yep.
in that 10 years, right? We're like, maybe that's what they thought was the fastest board for a sprint then. And we've just since learned that it's not.
Absolutely.
But in their defense, right? Like the sprint is a recognizable name, where you say, like, yeah, I paddle a sprint. Most people in the sport are picturing the flat water starboard board that
Mhm.
we know, regardless of what year, right? So it would be silly of them to
No
try
doubt.
to rebrand that at
No
this
doubt.
point, even if it fits the use better. But you're right, right? Like I think, uh, and this is where my background comes in of like fitness and stuff. When people say like, oh, what fin do you use? What paddle do you use? What board are you on? All that stuff is drops in a bucket, right? Like if you're not on top of your training and on top of your sleep and nutrition and all that kind of stuff, it does not matter what board you're on, right? It's just like you just got to go spend a shit ton more time on your board doing the right things. Then you can worry about what board is going to be faster or slower for you. Because I think it coming in, you could see John's frustration a little bit with some of those conversations that he's having where like people don't know what they want or know what they need. And he kind of has to like try to hear them where they're at and then steer them to the right decision of what he knows, because he's done this so many times, is going to be the best thing for them. So I think for a lot of people out there, it's like the best thing you can do to figure out how to go faster is just paddle more, even if the board you're on right now isn't perfect for you. But you're not going to find out what works and what doesn't without paddling a lot.
Listen, one of the guys who's he's probably actually faster than me, in Seattle here, sort of newer in the SUP scene, has a 27-inch wide ancient starboard sprint. Like
Talking about Ted Sweeney.
no, Ted's on an all-star. Also, though 27.
Okay.
Yeah. No, this is Josh. But he's a really good rower. Like his entire life rowing. His fitness levels
Oh, dang.
off the charts. I'm on my fitness level is at perigee, we'll say, not in a high spot, and I'm on a very fast board.
Temporarily.
Yeah. I mean, I can go. It is. I can go very fast. I've got a 22-inch Freedom Pro, with my Sonic fin. I mean, and I can go very fast in it, right? Like my top speed is good. I can't, or I can barely stay with Josh for 5K right now. 5 inches wider, ancient shape.
Right.
His fitness level is just a difference maker. And that is exactly to your point. The board should be one. The more I think about this, the more I really do feel like this too. The board should be the one that you want to get on, not that you are sort of like, I need to tame this thing. Unless you're kind of like me, where you like the challenge. But for people who are kind of like entering, looking for a board to buy, don't let the marketing get you any of that. Really, I think folks should be looking for a board that you've been on that you just thought, I would like to be on this in rough stuff. I'd like to be on this in flat stuff. This is a board that will get me on the water,
Mhm.
and I'm never going to go, oh, it's a little too windy, it's a little too rough. If rough water is keeping you off the water for your training or whatever you want to do, that's no good either.
Sure. Yeah, I think, to a point where like I think you should be getting on boards, not should be. It's good you can get on boards that push you to get better as
Yep.
well, right? Like I think your 22-inch board was that for you, and a lot of people when they get a new board are stepping into a width or a design that's totally new for them. And there is going to be an adjustment period so long as it's uh an increment of adjustment that's reasonable to do
Yeah.
in a shortish time period, right? I think Larry Kane wrote a whole long thing about how many inches he thinks is like a manageable increment to go down per year, per season, or whatever.
Yeah.
I want to say it was like an inch and a half. No, I don't think it was any more than like 2 inches or something. But that's like a big difference, right? To ask somebody to go from a 26 to a 24-inch board, especially if you're talking about mixed condition stuff, it's a big difference, right? Or even at the pointy end, going from a 22-inch board to a 20-inch board, that's a huge difference, right? I think it gets bigger. The differences feel larger as you get narrower and narrower. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, I
there's just
think, find the qualities you want in a board. Let's go find which one has those things.
agreed. We need to have a I don't know, maybe it'll be Jimmy Terrell or someone from on to talk paddles too, because there's a similar thing too. And you and I have had a lot of conversations. We won't extend this to a 3-hour podcast talking about
Yeah.
paddles next, but there's a similar
I mean, we
conversation.
could.
Let's save for another episode. So we could probably wrap up. It's been a long while. What thoughts, feelings about having heard that long conversation about boards, board shape, board, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you alluded to with like the marketing stuff that some board brands are going to say that they're X amount of board lengths faster every season, or that X paddle is going to make you a certain percent faster. Hearing it from somebody who's in the business of having those conversations and making the product, to hear him talk about that, that's really not what's happening, at least on his end. Um, was comforting to me, right? It's like it makes me feel again that I'm more in control, that I don't need to go board crazy. Like, yeah, you want to find a board that you enjoy paddling, like you said, that is going to make you psyched to get on the water and is going to give you the things that you want. But really, at the end of the day, it's about getting on the water, enjoying yourself, and being able to put in the effort to try to get faster are really the things that it comes back to. And you don't have to go spend $3,500 a year to go faster and keep up with your friends. So that
Yeah.
was, to me, that was cool to hear, even through all the thoughts that he's and the rest of the Flying Fish team are tinkering with all the time, that they know that they're still splitting hairs to some degree is comforting to me.
Yeah.
You?
No, I totally agree. It's about fitness at the end of the day. That's all. It's about fitness,
Yeah.
and the board will, if you achieve a certain level of fitness, whatever that is, it could be pretty average, but a board will help you maximize where your fitness level is there. But it's not going to make you more fit by itself. I mean, so
That well put.
yeah.
Well put.
And look, I paddle Flying Fish, absolutely love them. You paddle Synovas right now, love them. We've got friends who paddle all different types of boards. There's a lot of good boards out there. I think John gave us a really good way to think about what it is exactly that we're investing in, and how we're utilizing it, which is pretty cool. So really appreciate him spending all that time with us on a Saturday work day. And it was cool to see the foam blocks back behind them, soon to be boards.
Yeah, the blanks behind
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. I would encourage anyone to go, first go to Matt, you included, go down there, go paddle in those races. It's incredibly fun. Go visit the fish tank. Really cool place. Really cool to see how boards are actually made. I'll make this one point. We've had a lot of conversations on the USA SUP board about, sort of the concept of races versus events, and it's a semantics thing for me, but I will tell you that we were talking about 140 paddlers. We talked about the really fast ones at the front. I would say about 70% of them were there just to enjoy the scene and each other. The whitewater at the start was insane, and then they just wait for it to kind of cool and go paddling along and talk to each other. There was a 1 mile loop, a 3 mile short course, which is the one I did, and a 5 mile. That scene down there is not all hardcore racers. It's and that I think meshes with the where USA SUP is really wanting to go, and this includes our national championship that we're planning for November. That this sport, regardless of the width of your board or whatever it is, it's about the community at the end of the day, and competition is the way we bring the community together. And that very first thing we talked about, that race down in Jupiter, was a perfect example of that. And we can talk about really fast carbon fiber boards and all that sort of thing, but there's plenty of people there on their ancient surf shapes, sort of just chugging around, and that's the beauty of a really good scene. So for those of you who are watching this, who are in sort of smaller scenes or burgeoning scenes, I think that has been the secret to the success there, certainly for us in Seattle as well. That, yeah, you might have a fleet of really high end boards, but at the end of the day, it's what goes on after the race, everyone getting together, whether it's in the parking lot, on the beach, or in a place like Guanabanas, which is pretty incredible. That's what makes it go. That's what makes a business like John's able to run, because people grow and maybe they decide they do want to be a little bit more competitive and go from their surf shape to a custom board, or they buy one from a place like Blue Line, etc.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add to that is I personally want to kind of redefine the term of hardcore racer, right? Like, to me, that doesn't mean you're fast. right? If you're out there and you're battling for not last with three other guys, that's awesome, right? Like you have the same stories as the people who are battling for first, second, or third afterward, because you are in a race that is happening in real time for you. And if you're out there enjoying yourself and you're having a good time with the community, and you're doing something that's healthy and beneficial for you physically and mentally, to me, you're a hardcore racer, right? Like if that's what you enjoy doing, it doesn't matter to me where in that pack you finish, but you're having the same experiences. And to me, that's why I like going and hanging out at races too, is being able to see and hear those experiences regardless of where they're happening throughout the race, because they're the same.
Yeah.
So again, like if anybody out there is feeling that way about like, oh well, I'm not a hardcore racer, but I do enjoy going to races, then to me you're a racer the same way, the top athletes are, because that's what they're there to do. The same. Our sport's not big enough for anybody to be making millions of dollars doing it, so you got to do it for the love of it. So yeah, to your point, go enjoy it. Come to the USA SUP Nationals in Long Beach, California in November. More info will be coming out rather soon, we hope. And yeah, come be hardcore racers with us, whatever that means to you.
Yeah, in the community. Perfect, man. Let's leave it on that note. Hey, thanks everyone for sticking around. This was an epic hour and a half plus. So bonus content for you. You can thank us later.
Right.
See you, man.